Snow fell in slow, deliberate spirals, catching what little light the moon still offered. The cascades had gone silent hours ago. No owls, no coyotes, not even the wind dared to move through the pines. Walter Kane lifted his lantern higher, its glow flickering across the trail that wound through the frozen timber like a pale scar. He'd walked this route for 30 years as a forest ranger and another 10 in retirement, mostly out of habit. But tonight, something felt off. The air was too still, too heavy. The kind of quiet that didn't belong to nature. It belonged to waiting. He adjusted the scarf at his neck, feeling the sting of the wind crawl down to his bones. His breath hung in the air, silver and brief. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a branch cracked, sharp, sudden. He froze. Another sound followed, softer this time, like fabric brushing against snow. His boots broke the crusted layer of ice as he stepped forward, lantern trembling in his hand. At the edge of the path, near a fallen spruce, he saw her. A figure sprawled half-buried beneath the drift, motionless except for the faintest quiver of her fingers. Bare feet, a thin nightgown, clinging to skin turned almost blue. No coat, no gloves, just a woman who looked like she had stepped out of a nightmare and into the wilderness. "Ma'am." Walter's voice came out hoarse. He knelt beside her, brushing snow from her face. Her eyelashes were crusted with frost, lips cracked and trembling. For a heartbeat, he thought she was gone. Then a whisper escaped her mouth, the shape of a word too faint to catch. He pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, feeling the brittle chill of her skin through the fabric. She was light, too light, as he lifted her into his arms. The forest offered no sound, only the crunch of his boots and his uneven breathing as he carried her toward the cabin tucked between the trees. Inside, he lowered her gently onto the couch near the stove. The fire had burned low, but the coals glowed enough to catch. He fed it more logs, their resin hissing as flames roared to life. Then he filled a kettle, hands trembling only slightly. He'd seen cold before, hunters lost, hikers who misjudged a storm, but never anyone like this. She looked wrong, fragile but not helpless, more like someone who'd run until there was nowhere left to go. Her breathing came shallow, uneven. Walter found an old wool blanket, wrapped her tighter, and set the steaming mug of water beside her. He was about to reach for the radio on the shelf when her voice broke the stillness. "Don't call anyone," she whispered. Her eyes opened slowly, pale green, sharp even through exhaustion. "Wait," he hesitated. "You need help." "I should, please," she interrupted, clutching his wrist with surprising strength. "Call the police, but not for me." Her voice cracked, barely audible over the fire's crackle. "My son, he's in danger." The way she said it, steady, deliberate, made something crawl beneath Walter's skin. He nodded slowly, easing his hand from hers. "All right. What's your name?" She blinked, as if remembering who she was took effort. "Margaret. Margaret Collins." Walter moved toward the radio, adjusting the frequency. Static filled the air. Then the clipped voice of the county dispatcher came through. He gave his name, location, and told them he had a woman found in the woods, disoriented, possibly injured. When he turned back, she was sitting up, shivering violently but alert now, eyes fixed on the window as if expecting someone to appear from the dark. "Who's in danger, Margaret?" he asked. She stared into the fire. The reflection of the flames danced across her face like ghosts of memory. "My son," she whispered again, each word trembling in the heat. "He's coming for me." Outside, the wind began to rise, howling low through the trees, carrying a sound that didn't quite belong to the storm. The cabin creaked softly under the weight of the wind. Outside, snow pressed against the windows in thick, swirling veils. Inside, the room smelled of pine smoke and boiled water. Walter crouched by the stove, adjusting the damper until the fire roared steady again. Behind him, the woman stirred. Margaret sat upright now, her blanket slipping slightly from her shoulders. Steam rose from the cup he'd set in front of her, and her hands shook as she wrapped them around it. Her skin had regained a touch of color, though her lips were still pale, almost translucent in the firelight. Walter studied her quietly, the way he'd once studied wounded animals, gauging the difference between pain and fear. "You should drink that," he said gently. "You've been out there too long." She nodded, but didn't sip. Her eyes were locked on the window, the one facing the tree line, as if something might be watching from the dark. After a moment, she spoke. "You called the sheriff?" "I radioed dispatch," he replied. "They'll send someone up as soon as the road's clear. It might take a while." "That's not enough," she said, her voice rough, urgent. "You need to give them a name." Walter frowned, pulling a chair closer. "Whose name?" Her fingers tightened around the cup. "Nathan Collins." She said it quietly, as if the name itself could wake the forest. "He's dangerous." Walter leaned back. "Is he the one who did this to you?" For a long moment she didn't answer. Her gaze flickered toward the door. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "He's my son." The words hung between them, cold and heavy. Walter felt the temperature in the room drop, not from the fire, but from the silence that followed. He'd heard a lot of things in his years out here. Hunters swearing they'd seen lights in the trees, drunks confessing things they didn't understand. But this was different. There was no madness in her voice, only certainty. He turned toward the radio again. "I'll let them know," he said, keeping his tone calm. "Nathan Collins. Your son. I'll tell them he's dangerous." As he relayed the information, Margaret stood, wobbling slightly before steadying herself on the arm of the couch. She moved toward the fire, holding her hands out to the heat. Her hair, wet, tangled, streaked with snow melt, cast long shadows against the log wall. When Walter finished, he glanced back at her. "They've got the name. Said they'll check records." Margaret nodded slowly, but her expression didn't ease. "You don't understand," she murmured. "He'll come here. He always finds me." Walter crossed his arms, weighing whether to push further. "How long has he been gone?" Her eyes met his for the first time, clear, haunted, green as thawed ice. "A lifetime," she said softly, "and still not long enough." The fire popped, spitting an ember onto the hearthstone. Walter stamped it out with his boot. "Why don't you sit back down?" he said. "You need to rest." "I'll make tea. It's better than water." She managed a faint smile at that, the kind people make when gratitude feels too small for what they mean. When he returned with 2 cups, she sat again, staring into the flames. "I taught first grade for 20 years, she said suddenly, her tone distant, almost mechanical. "I thought I understood children, thought patience could fix anything." Walter didn't speak. He knew that kind of voice, the one that came not from memory, but from exhaustion. Margaret looked down at her hands. "It started in Eugene," she whispered. "That's where I met him, where we brought him home." Her eyes went distant, fixed somewhere beyond the cabin walls. The storm's howling became softer, as though even the wind was listening. Walter leaned forward, slightly, the mug warm between his palms. He didn't interrupt when she continued, her words slow but unbroken, drifting toward a place far removed from this mountain cabin. "It was a long time ago," she said. "We were going to be a family." And as her voice fell into the rhythm of memory, the fire's crackle faded into the sound of another world. One of summer light, a small house in Eugene, and a woman who still believed love could save anyone. The memory came to her in fragments, sunlight slanting through lace curtains, the hum of a ceiling fan, the scent of tulips Thomas always bought on weekends. Back then, life in Eugene moved quietly. Margaret taught reading at the elementary school on Elm Street, and Thomas spent his days designing irrigation systems for local farms. They were gentle people, devoted to routines and to each other. Their only failure, as the world called it, was the empty nursery upstairs. For years they'd tried, doctors, specialists, endless procedures that left Margaret bruised and hollow. By the time she turned 35, hope had begun to feel like a cruel habit. One evening, after another appointment ended with polite sympathy, Thomas held her hand across the kitchen table and said, "Maybe it doesn't have to be our blood to be our child." She had cried, but they were the tears that follow relief, not grief. Within months, they were meeting with the state adoption office. The first visit was sterile, gray walls, kind voices, folders stacked high with paperwork. But when the social worker brought in a small boy with sandy hair and cautious eyes, the world seemed to pause. "This is Luke," the woman said, kneeling beside him. "He's 3. Luke clutched a wooden truck in his tiny hands and peeked up at them. When Margaret smiled, he smiled back. Something inside her, a space that had felt cold for years, shifted and filled. She knew instantly that this was her son. Thomas crouched, extending his hand. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly. Luke didn't speak, but he rolled the truck forward until it touched Thomas's shoe. It was enough. They left that day, certain of their decision. They would bring Luke home. They would finally be a family. But a week later, the social worker called again. Her tone was hesitant. "There's something we need to discuss," she said. "Luke has an older brother, Nathan, 4 years old. State policy doesn't allow siblings to be separated." Margaret's heart sank. She and Thomas exchanged a long, quiet look. "2 children?" he asked. "Yes," the woman said. "They're close in age. It's best they stay together." Margaret hesitated. They had prepared for one room, one small bed, one chance to start again. 2 felt overwhelming. "Can we meet him?" she asked finally. The second visit was nothing like the first. Nathan entered the room without holding anyone's hand. His dark eyes scanned them with an expression far too adult for his age. He didn't smile, didn't blink. When the social worker tried to guide him forward, he pulled his arm away. "This is Nathan," she said gently. Thomas offered his hand just as he had with Luke. "Hi, Nathan. I'm Thomas." The boy looked at him for a long time, then at Margaret. "You're not my parents," he said flatly. The word stung more than she expected. Margaret forced a smile. "Maybe not yet," she said softly. He turned away, walking to the corner and sitting cross-legged, tracing the edge of the carpet with his finger. Luke watched him quietly, as if waiting for permission to breathe. On the drive home, Thomas reached for her hand. "We can handle this," he said. "They need a home. That's all that matters." Margaret nodded, though doubt coiled in her chest. "He's different," she whispered. "Different doesn't mean bad," Thomas said, his voice steady. "He just needs time." She wanted to believe that. She told herself love could mend anything, that if she was patient, if she was kind enough, she could reach him. She repeated it like a prayer while repainting the spare bedroom and sewing matching quilts with blue stars. A month later, both boys walked through the Collins front door, Luke holding her hand, Nathan walking a step behind, silent and watchful. Margaret looked at them standing there in the glow of the porch light and felt the first flicker of something she hadn't dared feel in years. Hope. She didn't know, not then, how fragile that hope would prove to be, or how easily it could turn into something colder. From the first week, the house felt uneven, like the air itself shifted depending on which boy entered the room. Luke filled it with laughter, curious questions, small footsteps echoing down the hallway. Nathan, though only a year older, seemed made of silence. He watched everything. People, doors, the smallest movements, without a flicker of warmth. When Margaret read bedtime stories, Luke leaned against her shoulder, eyes wide with wonder. Nathan sat apart, expression blank, waiting for the last page as if enduring a chore. Margaret tried to be patient. She reminded herself that adjustment took time, that trauma lingered in ways adults rarely understood. She made sure both boys got the same hugs, the same toys, the same praise. Yet no matter how carefully she balanced her affection, Nathan always seemed to find them balance. One morning, she found her favorite vase shattered on the kitchen floor. Luke sobbed, insisting he hadn't touched it. Nathan stood nearby, his face unreadable. "It fell," he said simply. When she asked how, he shrugged. "Things fall." Later that week, she found drawings on the living room wall, black crayon lines, rough and jagged, forming shapes she couldn't quite name. "You can draw on paper, Nathan," she said gently. He looked up from the carpet, eyes flat. "Paper tears," he replied. Every day brought something new. The garden plants pulled up by their roots. The lamp in Luke's room smashed. Her wedding photo missing from the mantel. She and Thomas tried every approach. Firm boundaries, soft understanding, even brief separations when tempers rose. None of it reached him. Thomas remained optimistic. "He's testing us," he said one night, rubbing his temples, "trying to see if we'll send him back like the others." Margaret wanted to believe that, but sometimes when she caught Nathan staring at her, expressionless, unblinking, it felt less like testing and more like studying. The breaking point came one evening after dinner. Luke was playing quietly with toy cars while Nathan sat apart, building towers of blocks only to knock them down again. Margaret turned her back for a moment to rinse dishes. When she looked again, Luke was crying, blood welling from a small cut on his arm. The broken edge of a block lay beside him. Nathan watched impassively, his fingers still curled around another piece. "What happened?" she demanded. Luke hiccuped through tears. "He hit me." Margaret spun toward Nathan. "Is that true?" He tilted his head. "He took my car," he said. "You don't hurt people," she said sharply. "Ever." He met her gaze, calm as stone. "Then he shouldn't take what's mine." That night, after both boys were in bed, Margaret sat awake, heart pounding. She couldn't shake the feeling that Nathan's words hadn't been childish defiance. They'd been logic. Cold, deliberate logic. The next day, she scheduled an appointment with a child psychologist in downtown Eugene. Thomas thought it was unnecessary, but he agreed to come. Maybe, she hoped, someone trained could explain this, could fix this. In the waiting room, Nathan sat quietly beside her, swinging his feet. When the doctor called them in, he transformed. His voice softened, his posture straightened, his tone perfectly polite. He answered every question with precision, even smiled once, something Margaret had rarely seen at home. The session lasted 40 minutes. The doctor listened kindly, occasionally glancing toward her notes, but by the end her smile had grown tight. "Mrs. Collins," she said, folding her hands, "I think Nathan is adjusting well, considering his background. You seem very anxious. Children can sense that." Margaret blinked. "You think this is me?" The doctor gave a sympathetic tilt of the head. "Perhaps you're expecting too much too soon. He's charming, well-spoken, cooperative. I don't see any behavioral red flags." Nathan looked up at her then, his expression soft, angelic. "I told you I'm good, Mommy," he said sweetly. The doctor smiled. "There, see? A lovely boy." Margaret couldn't find words. Her face burned as they left the office, humiliation mixing with dread. In the car, Nathan hummed quietly in the back seat, tapping the window with one finger. At a red light, she glanced in the mirror. His reflection met hers. He smiled, not the innocent smile from the doctor's office, but something colder, sharper. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. That night, Margaret realized the truth she'd been avoiding. Nathan didn't just know how to behave. He knew when to perform. By autumn, the Collins house had turned into a battlefield disguised as a home. Nathan no longer bothered to hide his defiance. He spoke only when it served him, obeyed rules when it amused him, and smiled only when someone else was hurting. Luke had grown quieter, sticking close to Margaret, watching every move his brother made as if living beside a small, unpredictable storm. It began with the cat. Snowball, the small white stray they had rescued 2 years before the adoption, was the family's comfort, a creature that purred against Thomas's leg while he read the paper and followed Margaret from room to room. One afternoon, she found the cat limping, tail bent at an unnatural angle. When she asked what happened, Luke burst into tears before words could form. Nathan stood behind him, face blank. "It fell off the porch," he said evenly. "You should tell it to be more careful." Margaret rushed the cat to the vet. The X-ray showed a clean break, too precise to be an accident. That night, as she wrapped the animal's leg, she heard Nathan laughing softly in his room. She didn't ask why. After that, Luke refused to be alone with him. Nathan teased him relentlessly, stealing his toys, whispering things that made him cry, and twisting every attempt at discipline into theater. When Thomas scolded both boys, Nathan would lower his eyes and murmur, "I'm sorry, Dad." He never called Margaret Mom anymore. Thomas clung to optimism long after reason had given up. "He's just angry, Maggie," he would say, rubbing her shoulders as if reassurance could erase fear. "Give him time. He'll come around." But time didn't heal, it sharpened him. One evening, Thomas came home from work early to find Luke's crayons scattered across the floor. Nathan sat at the table, calmly drawing a picture, a stick figure woman standing beside a fire. When Thomas asked about it, Nathan smiled. "It's a surprise for Mom." Thomas laughed awkwardly, not seeing the look that flashed across Margaret's face when she entered the room. Later, when she found the drawing tucked under her pillow, her hands trembled. By December, exhaustion had seeped into everything. Her marriage, her patience, her sleep. Even Luke had stopped asking why his brother didn't love them. The house smelled faintly of ash and ammonia. Small fires had appeared. Charred corners of notebooks, burnt paper towels, a matchbook hidden beneath Nathan's mattress. Still, Thomas refused to believe it. "You're seeing patterns that aren't there," he insisted one night. "He's a child. He needs stability, not suspicion." Margaret wanted to scream, but she was too tired. She only whispered, "Then explain why I'm afraid to sleep." The breaking point came on a Sunday morning. Thomas went to his desk to retrieve the envelope he'd been saving for months, nearly $5,000 in cash, their down payment for a used car. The drawer was empty. In its place lay a single scrap of paper with a hand-drawn smiley face. Round, uneven, the lines pressed so hard they nearly tore through. Margaret heard his voice from the study. First disbelief, then something closer to a sob. "Where is it?" Nathan appeared in the doorway, his hands in his pockets. "You mean the money?" Thomas turned, red-faced. "What did you do with it?" Nathan's grin was slow, deliberate. "I burned it." The room went still. "You what?" He shrugged. "Fire looks beautiful." For a second, no one breathed. Then Thomas lunged forward, gripping the boy's shoulders. "You're lying." Nathan didn't flinch. "Go check the fireplace," he said calmly. "It's still warm." Margaret felt the world tilt as she ran to the hearth. Inside, half-melted bills curled like blackened leaves among the embers. The smell of smoke clung to everything. Thomas stepped back, his face draining of color. His breath came short, uneven. "Why? Why would you do this?" he rasped. Nathan tilted his head, as if genuinely considering. "Because you love money more than me." Then Thomas's hand clutched his chest. His knees buckled. "Thomas!" Margaret's scream broke through the static of the moment. She caught him before he hit the floor, his weight heavy, his face ghost pale. "Luke, call 911." The boy froze in terror, unable to move. Margaret grabbed the phone herself, her trembling fingers barely pressing the numbers. Nathan stood a few feet away, watching it all with quiet fascination, the faint reflection of the fire dancing in his eyes. The dispatcher's voice echoed through the receiver, steady, procedural, but Margaret barely heard it. She pressed her hand against Thomas's heart, counting the shallow, stuttering beats. When the sirens finally broke the silence outside, Nathan was still standing in the same spot, hands clasped behind his back, smiling as if admiring his work. Thomas survived, but something in him broke that day and never quite healed. The doctors called it a minor cardiac episode, but Margaret saw the fear in his eyes when he came home from the hospital, a fear not of death, but of their own child. For a week, the house was quiet. Nathan pretended to be concerned, bringing his father glasses of water and whispering soft apologies that sounded rehearsed. Luke avoided his brother entirely. The silence in the Collins household became unbearable. Late one evening, while Thomas slept, Margaret sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the faint burn marks in the fireplace where the money had turned to ash. Her mind circled the same thought. This cannot go on. She wanted to believe in second chances, but love had become a dangerous luxury. When she finally spoke to Thomas about sending Nathan back, he didn't argue. He only nodded, tears welling in his tired eyes. They told Luke that Nathan was going away to a school that could help him. Luke didn't ask questions. He only clutched his mother's hand, as if already understanding that goodbyes sometimes come as mercy. The morning they left, snow still clung to the lawns in Eugene. Nathan refused to wear his coat, standing in the driveway with his arms crossed, watching Margaret with open hatred. She tried to help him into the car, but he jerked away from her touch. "I can do it myself," he muttered, sliding into the back seat. The drive to the children's home took over an hour. Neither of them spoke at first. The wipers beat a steady rhythm against the windshield, and the radio hummed low static. Margaret tried once. "They'll take care of you there, Nathan. It's not forever." He turned his head, slowly, eyes cold and steady. "You think you can just get rid of me?" Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. "No one's getting rid of you. You need help. Help?" He cut her off, his voice rising. "You're the one who needs help. You're the crazy one." She flinched, but didn't respond. He laughed then, the kind of laugh that sounded too old for a child. "You'll pay for this," he hissed. "All of you." Margaret's chest tightened. The words didn't sound like a tantrum. They sounded like a promise. When they arrived, the counselor met them at the entrance, her tone polite but detached. Nathan stepped out without looking back. No hugs, no tears, only the echo of his boots on the tiled floor as he disappeared down the hall. Margaret signed the papers in silence. When the final page was complete, she stood for a long moment staring at the closed door through which her son had vanished. Her hands shook, and she pressed them together until the tremor stopped. Driving home, she pulled to the side of the road twice to cry. The second time, she didn't even realize she'd turned off the engine. Snow began to fall again, soft, soundless, and endless. At home, Luke ran to her, asking if Nathan would come back soon. She said yes, though her voice cracked around the word. Thomas didn't speak that night. He just held her while she cried against his chest, the faint scent of hospital disinfectant still clinging to his shirt. Years passed. Slowly, life found its rhythm again. Thomas's health stabilized, and the house grew warm once more. Luke thrived, gentle, bright, everything a parent could hope for. He earned scholarships, became an engineer, married a kind woman named Katie. Margaret watched him with a quiet awe, as if afraid that happiness might vanish if she looked at it too long. Still, sometimes in winter, when the wind pressed against the windows just right, she would hear an echo, the distant voice of a boy in the back seat, whispering through the years, "You'll pay for this." And though she told herself it was only memory, part of her knew better. Some promises outlast the people who make them. The years that followed unfolded, like a long exhale after years of holding one's breath. Nathan's absence turned the house eerily quiet, but peace, fragile and tentative, slowly returned. Luke finished college, took a job with an engineering firm in Portland, and married Katie, a soft-spoken nurse with eyes that saw the good in everyone. Margaret loved her instantly. For the first time in decades, She felt the weight of fear begin to lift. When Katie announced she was pregnant, Margaret and Thomas cried in each other's arms. "Twins," Katie said, laughing through tears. "Two little miracles." Margaret pressed her hands together, whispering a prayer she hadn't dared speak since the boy's adoption. Maybe, finally, life was giving something back. The months that followed were full of small, ordinary joys. Thomas built cribs in his workshop. Margaret knitted tiny sweaters. Luke visited every weekend, helping around the house, telling stories about work and the nursery they were decorating. For once, Margaret could talk about family without feeling the shadow of Nathan darken her words. Winter came early that year. Snow dusting Eugene before Thanksgiving. The night of the crash began like any other, cold, crisp, unremarkable. Luke and Katie were driving home from a prenatal appointment, laughing about the twins kicking during the ultrasound. Margaret had spoken to them an hour before. She remembered Luke's voice, full of excitement. "Mom, I'll send you the picture tomorrow," he'd said. The call came near midnight. The police dispatcher's voice was calm but tight. "Mrs. Collins, there's been an accident on Highway 58. Your son's car went off the road." Thomas was already reaching for his coat before she hung up. They drove through the storm, the wipers clawing at the windshield, headlights slicing through snow. When they reached the scene, red and blue lights flashed against the whiteness, painting the night in grief. The car was mangled against a tree, its front end buried in snow. Katie was gone before the ambulance arrived. Luke was unconscious, trapped behind the wheel. The paramedics worked in silence, their breath turning white in the air. Margaret remembered screaming his name until her throat burned, but no sound came out. At the hospital in Bend, she sat beside his bed for 2 days, barely moving. The doctor explained that the twins hadn't survived the impact. Margaret felt time collapse, years folding over themselves until she was back in that other winter. The drive to the state home, the echo of a boy's voice promising vengeance. When Luke finally woke, his first words were, "Where's Katie?" Margaret took his hand and told him gently, her voice trembling with the lie of composure. He didn't cry. He only turned his face to the window, watching snow drift against the glass. The investigation began a week later. The police were kind but cautious. The brake line, the detective said, "It's been tampered with. Cut clean through." Thomas frowned, confused. "That doesn't make sense. Luke just had the car serviced." Margaret's body went cold. Every sound in the room, the hum of the fluorescent light, the tick of the wall clock, fell away until there was only one voice left in her mind. "You'll pay for this. All of you." The detective asked questions she barely heard. Could anyone have had access to the vehicle? Any disputes? Anyone who might hold a grudge? She shook her head, unable to speak. That night, long after Thomas fell asleep in the hospital chair, Margaret stood alone in the corridor. The snow outside glowed blue under the parking lot lights. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat race like it wanted to escape. She had spent years convincing herself that Nathan's words were a child's anger, nothing more. But the brake line's clean cut told a different story, a story that had followed her across decades and through every fragile piece of peace she'd built. Somewhere out there, her son was still keeping his promise. The night it happened was a quiet one, too quiet for February. The streets of Eugene lay under a thin crust of snow, the air sharp with cold. Margaret parked in her driveway just after 9, exhausted from the long day at the hospital. Luke's recovery was slow, but he had smiled for the first time that afternoon. It had felt like sunlight breaking through fog. She'd promised to bring him homemade soup tomorrow, kissed his forehead and whispered, "Everything will be all right." Now, as she stepped out of the car, that fragile hope clung to her like warmth from a dying fire. She carried a grocery bag in one arm, fumbling with her keys. The porch light flickered weakly, then went out. A shiver slid down her spine. She told herself it was just the wiring. Thomas had meant to fix it before his last checkup, but time had gotten away. Inside, the house smelled of dust and wood polish. She set the groceries down on the kitchen counter and turned toward the hallway. The light switch clicked uselessly beneath her thumb. Darkness swallowed everything. "Nathan!" she whispered before she even knew she'd spoken his name. It was an instinct, a thought half buried but never gone. Silence answered. She reached for her phone to use its flashlight. Before she could unlock it, something moved behind her, a shift in air, soft and certain. Then a shove, hard, fast, deliberate. She hit the floor, pain flashing up her wrist. The phone clattered away across the tiles. "Who's there?" she gasped, pushing herself up. The sound of a door closing answered her, a click of a lock. Then a voice she hadn't heard in decades, deeper now, but unmistakably his. "Hello, Mom." Her breath caught. She turned slowly, heart hammering. A tall man stepped into the thin band of light spilling from the stove's clock. His hair was darker than she remembered, his face leaner, older, but the eyes were the same. Cold, amused. Nathan smiled, and for a moment she saw the boy he had once been. "You look surprised," he said, tilting his head. "Didn't think I'd come home?" Margaret couldn't speak. Her voice felt trapped somewhere behind her ribs. He walked toward her, calm, measured. "You didn't even recognize me when I called the hospital last week," he continued. "Guess they were right. You really did forget about me." She forced the words out. How did you get out?" He laughed quietly. "Get out?" He crouched to pick up her phone, turning it over in his hand. "Oh, I didn't escape, if that's what you mean. They let me go. I'm reformed now. Productive member of society." The smile widened. "They believed every word I said." He snapped the phone in two and tossed the pieces onto the counter. "Still trust people too easily, huh? Guess I got that from you." Margaret stumbled backward until her legs hit the edge of the table. "Why are you here?" she whispered. "Why?" His tone sharpened. "You really need me to explain? You left me in that place, remember? Said I needed help." He made air quotes with his fingers. "Do you know what they do to kids in there? They teach you things. How to act. How to smile. How to lie. Turns out I was a fast learner." He began circling her slowly, like a predator testing the perimeter of its cage. "They told me to draw, to talk about my feelings. I told them what they wanted to hear, and they called me remarkably self-aware. I told them about forgiveness, and they wrote it down as progress. I told them I didn't think about you anymore." He stopped behind her, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But I did. Every day." Margaret trembled. "Nathan, please." "You don't have to," he cut her off, slamming his hand on the table. "Don't what? Be angry? You left me to rot while you played happy family with him." He spat the last word like venom. "Your precious Luke." Her throat tightened. "Luke is innocent. He's alive," Nathan said, leaning closer. "That's the difference between us." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the steady ticking of the kitchen clock, ordinary sounds that now seemed grotesque against a nightmare unfolding in front of her. Nathan reached out, brushing his fingers against a framed photo on the wall. Luke's wedding day. "You really thought you could erase me, didn't you?" he said softly. "But erasing someone only works if they stay gone." He turned back toward her, the smile gone now, replaced by something colder. "You sent me away, Mom. You broke me. And the funny thing is, I think you knew what I'd become." Margaret's breath came in shallow gasps. She glanced toward the door, but his body shifted just enough to block her path. Outside, wind pushed against the windows, making the glass groan. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed, distant and fading. Inside the Collins home, the world had stopped. Just a mother and the son she once prayed for, standing in the dark, each haunted by what the other had created. Margaret could feel her pulse hammering in her throat, each beat loud enough to drown out reason. Nathan had moved closer, his body a dark outline against the faint light seeping in from the window. She could smell the cold air clinging to his clothes, the metallic tang of snow, and something sharper beneath it. Grease, maybe, or oil. He'd been somewhere mechanical, somewhere deliberate. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, though her voice betrayed her fear. Nathan smiled thinly. "You say that like I had a choice, like I wasn't already here." He tapped his temple. "You never left, Mom. You and him. You lived in my head for 20 years. He began pacing slowly, fingers trailing across the table's edge. "When they sent me to Salem, I promised myself I wouldn't rot there. You know what they do to kids like me? They make you invisible. They tell you you're sick until you believe it. But I learned their rules. I learned to smile, to look down at the right moments, to say yes, sir, and thank you, ma'am. They called it progress. I called it preparation." He looked back at her, and for a heartbeat, Margaret saw the boy he once was, the quiet child drawing in corners, watching her with cold, unblinking eyes. "When they said I was well enough to leave, I knew what I'd do first." Margaret's voice came out as a rasp. "The brakes, it was you." Nathan's grin widened. "Of course it was me." He took a step closer. "You think things like that just happen? I watched them for months, Luke and his perfect little wife, smiling like they'd earned something. I studied the car, waited for the right night. You should have seen it, Mom. It was clean, precise, like surgery." She covered her mouth, choking back a sob. "They were your family." He barked a laugh. "Family? You mean your second try at doing it right." He leaned in, eyes wild. "You replaced me. You pretended none of it happened. But it did. Every day in that place. Every night locked in a room while the walls talked louder than people ever did. You put me there." Margaret backed away until her shoulders hit the wall. "You hurt innocent people," she whispered. "No," he said, voice low and trembling with conviction. "I hurt you. That's all I ever wanted." He reached for her wrist, gripping it hard enough to make her flinch. "You could have fixed me. You could have tried harder. But you loved him more." "I loved you both," she said, breath catching. "You just wouldn't let me." Nathan's face twisted. "Don't lie." His other hand darted into his coat pocket and came out holding a length of cord, rough, worn, maybe torn from something else. "You never loved me. You tolerated me. There's a difference." He grabbed her arms, forcing them behind her back. The cord scraped against her skin as he tied her wrists. "We're leaving," he said. "We'll finish what you started. You'll see what it's like to be alone where no one believes you." Margaret's heart pounded, so violently she thought it might burst. "Nathan, please," she whispered. "You don't have to do this." He ignored her, dragging her toward the back door. His grip was iron, unrelenting. "Don't pretend you care now. It's too late for that." But as they neared the door, something changed, an unexpected sound. The faint buzz of a car pulling up outside. Headlights flashed across the frosted window, sweeping the room in white. Nathan froze. Margaret didn't think, she acted. She drove her heel into his shin and twisted free, stumbling toward the counter. He lunged, grabbing her shoulder, but she snatched the kettle from the stove and flung the boiling water toward him. It caught his arm and face, steam hissing. Nathan screamed, a sound so raw it didn't sound human. He stumbled back, clutching his blistering skin. Margaret ran. The back door banged open, a gust of icy wind flooding the kitchen. She tore through the yard barefoot, snow slicing into her feet like shards of glass. Behind her, she heard him roar her name, ragged, enraged, but she didn't stop. The night swallowed her, each breath burning in her chest. The forest loomed ahead, black and endless. Branches clawed at her arms as she pushed through, slipping, falling, getting up again. The cold gnawed at her skin, but adrenaline kept her moving. Somewhere behind, Nathan's footsteps crashed through the snow. "Mom," he screamed, "you can't run from this." Her lungs ached, but she kept going, her vision blurring. The world tilted between trees and moonlight, shadows and memory. Somewhere deep inside her, a single thought pulsed. Not again. I will not die by what I created. She stumbled onto the old trail that wound toward the mountain ridge, the same one that led to Walter Kane's cabin miles away. Her breath came in broken clouds. Each step felt heavier than the last. Behind her, the noise grew faint, then stopped altogether. Maybe he'd lost her. Maybe he was waiting. She didn't look back. When her legs finally gave out, she fell to her knees, snow biting into her palms. The wind howled through the pines, erasing her footprints as quickly as she made them. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a single light flickered faintly in the dark, a cabin's window. Margaret crawled forward, each motion slower than the last, the memory of Nathan's voice still echoing inside her skull. "You'll pay for this, all of you, but not tonight," she thought. Not tonight. And with the last of her strength, she pulled herself through the snow, toward that sliver of light that meant survival, or at least the chance to tell someone what had finally come for her. By the time dawn stretched over the mountains, the storm had eased, leaving a pale silence over the snow-buried forest. Walter's cabin sat like an island of smoke and warmth amid the drifts. Inside, Margaret lay on the couch, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled faintly of pine and firewood. Her feet were bandaged, her skin raw from the night's escape. She hadn't slept, just drifted in and out of half-dreams filled with footsteps in the snow and the echo of her son's voice. Walter sat at the table, speaking softly into the landline. "Yes, Sheriff, that's right. She came in around midnight. Said her son attacked her. No, she's safe now. You'd better get someone to St. Joseph's Hospital, Luke Collins, ICU. That's where he's headed." Margaret closed her eyes, the words like fragments of some other life. Hospital, Luke, Nathan. Everything collided in her head, memories refusing to settle. When the knock finally came, it wasn't sharp or hurried. Just two steady raps, the sound of authority, trying not to frighten what was already broken. Walter opened the door to reveal two deputies, their uniforms dusted with snow. Behind them, dawn was breaking, a faint wash of pink over the horizon. The older officer stepped forward, his breath visible in the cold. "Mrs. Collins? We got him." Margaret rose slowly, her legs trembling as if the floor were shifting beneath her. "Where?" "At the hospital," the officer said. "He showed up just before sunrise. Security found him near the ICU wing, said he was asking for your son." He hesitated, then added he didn't resist, didn't even try to run. She nodded numbly. Some small, cruel part of her had expected as much. Nathan never ran. He made others do the running. The deputy continued, "He'll be transferred to Salem State Psychiatric under police supervision. You'll need to give a full statement later today." Margaret murmured something like, "Thank you," though her voice barely existed. Walter put a steady hand on her shoulder, the gesture anchoring her to the present. When the officers left, silence returned to the cabin, deep and almost sacred. The fire had burned low. Margaret walked to the window, her reflection faint in the frost-covered glass. Outside, the world looked peaceful, white, untouched, unknowing. "I can't even hate him," she said softly. "Isn't that strange?" Walter turned toward her. "You don't have to hate him. You just have to stop carrying him." She tried to smile but couldn't. "I thought if I loved him hard enough, it would undo whatever darkness was in him. But love doesn't fix what doesn't want to be fixed." For a while, neither spoke. The snow kept falling, slow and patient. By mid-morning, another patrol car arrived to take her statement. The young officer listened carefully as she recounted everything. The knock, the attack, the escape. Her words felt detached, like she was describing a movie she once saw rather than her own life. When it was done, he asked gently, "Do you want us to notify your son Luke that it's over?" Margaret looked toward the hills, where sunlight was beginning to pierce through the mist. "No," she said quietly. "Let him rest. He's been through enough." After the car left, Walter brewed coffee and handed her a cup. They stepped out onto the porch together, boots crunching against the snow. The air was sharp but clean, the kind that fills your lungs with something close to forgiveness. Down in the valley, the trees glistened like glass. The smoke from the chimney rose in slow spirals, blending with the pale light of day. For the first time in years, Margaret felt still. Not healed, not yet, but still. She wrapped her coat tighter around her and stared at the horizon. "Do you think," she asked, "some people are born like that? Or do we make them?" Walter took a long breath before answering. "Maybe both," he said. "Maybe the world gives them the spark and someone else gives them the match." Margaret nodded, her eyes filling with quiet understanding. The snow around them reflected the growing light, softening everything it touched. "Some monsters are born," she whispered, "and some are made." Walter looked at her, but she didn't turn. Her gaze was fixed on the woods beyond the clearing, where the wind stirred the branches into a slow, rhythmic sway. For the first time in decades, the forest didn't feel like it was holding its breath. It exhaled long and low, as if releasing everything it had witnessed. The sound of the wind through the pines was no longer a warning, but a song of return. Somewhere deep in the trees, a bird called out, tentative, then another answered. Margaret stood there until the light reached her face. Her fingers brushed the old scar on her wrist, the faint line left by the cord Nathan had tied around her. She let her hand fall, her shoulders straightening as the morning fully arrived. Behind her, the cabin door creaked, and Walter said softly, "You should rest." "In a minute," she replied. The sun rose higher, spilling gold across the snow. The footprints from the night before were already fading, disappearing under a new layer of white. And in that silence, neither grief nor peace, but something between, the world began again.